If you're looking how to raise your children with food and body confidence, then look no further. Even if you don't have children, then you might want to stay tuned, because in this episode, I'm talking to fellow dietitian Louise Pollard about how to raise kids with food and body confidence, how to make your home a safe space for body confidence, for body acceptance, in order to raise the next generation of intuitive eaters. Welcome to Body Acceptance, your podcast for trauma-informed yoga, intuitive eating, and self-love. I'm your host, Doris, and I will hand it over to Louise and myself for this interview. Thank you for listening and enjoy. Louise, I'm so happy that you're here and that we're going to have this podcast together. But before we start, would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yes, thanks, Doris. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation to be on your show. So I'm Louise Pollard. I am an accredited practicing dietitian and a certified intuitive eating counsellor with experience in kids nutrition in Australia, in the UK, and most recently in Switzerland. I've been living in Switzerland for about 24 years now after marrying my Swiss husband. I've lived for about 8 years in Geneva, and during that time I took a break away from nutrition and dietetics, worked as a clinical research associate in a clinical research organisation. In 2009, we moved up to the Basel area, which we've now made home. And I was a lecturer at the University of Applied Sciences in Bern in the Nutrition and Dietetic Department for about 10 years, before finally fulfilling a long-held dream of mine, and that was to open my own private practice, which I did in 2021. And my practice is dedicated to helping women who are tired of dieting and looking for an alternative approach to health, find food freedom, and also to parents who are who want to raise kids who are food and body confident.
Amazing. Twinsies. I also opened in started my practice in 2021. The COVID years, as we know them now, right?
Absolutely. Very challenging times with the pandemic and so on. So, yeah.
Yeah, but great for online businesses at least.
Absolutely, yes.
To start them. So you mentioned a food freedom approach, or sort of a different approach. How did you start working in that area? Sort of how did you find intuitive eating and this sort of weight neutral way of teaching or coaching people?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Doris. And there is no short answer to this. I think a lot of people can resonate with that who come to end up using the intuitive eating and a weight inclusive approach. I only came across it about 6 years ago, and it was during the time between leaving my teaching position at the university in Bern and opening my practice. So I was actually laying all the groundwork for my practice, and I was thinking about what it was that I really wanted to offer to people in my practice. And I literally stumbled across the intuitive eating approach by Evelyn Triboli and Elise Resch. And it really resonated with me, both from a personal and professional perspective. One of the things that I remembered when I started reading about the principle on satisfaction, for example, was shortly after arriving in Switzerland, looking for low-fat yogurts on the supermarket shelf and finding it really hard to find them. And this was really strange for me, coming from Australia and also having worked in the UK, where at the time it was low-fat yogurts on the supermarket shelf were the norm. I also noticed my husband was only eating regular yogurts. Also, his family were only eating regular yogurt. So I started eating these regular yogurts, whereas in the past I'd been trained in the low-fat diet. I was eating and consuming low-fat yogurts. And when I started eating the regular yogurts, I noticed I had a bit of an aha moment. I noticed, one, they tasted so much better. Two, they left me feeling full. They kept me going longer than the low-fat yogurts had ever done, which when I ate them after an hour, I was hungry again. And they were just so much more satisfying. And so when I read about the principle on satisfaction, this memory really came back to me. Um, and that was one thing. Another thing was that during the early years of when I was working as a dietitian in Australia and the UK, of course, I noticed that it was very difficult for people to lose weight and maintain that weight loss. Like every other dietitian at that time, I was trained in the weight centric approach. I was trained to counsel people on weight loss. And I noticed that it wasn't something that was sustainable for people. It's also one of the reasons why I took some time out from dietetics when I lived in Geneva and worked as a clinical research associate. So there was that. And then, so in the year before I opened my practice, I, in addition to learning about intuitive eating and doing my certification with Evelyn Triboli, I also did some further reading about the weight inclusive approach. And what really clinched it for me was, in addition to the intuitive eating approach and how much it makes sense, was reading about the harm that the weight centric approach does to everybody. And this was really the thing that clinched my decision to move from really a weight centric mentality to a weight inclusive mentality. As you know, Doris, as health professionals, we're required, we're asked, we're ethically required to do no harm. And so this was the thing that really clinched it for me. I don't know how, maybe that was the same for you. I don't know.
Yeah, a little similar, like you said, that sort of aha moment of, okay, there is a different approach. And as you said, sort of to find out how much harm you're doing. And then, so I always find it interesting, or like I find it such an irony or such a double standard when people, are discriminatory towards people in larger bodies and say, oh, I care about their weight. But it's like, you can't discriminate them because that's harming their health. And then say you're concerned. Like, it's just, you can't do that. It just, it doesn't work. And so that I find interesting, and how many health professionals still have that mentality, because we're essentially raised in a health-centric sort of society, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's something that I think is very hard for a lot of other health professionals to see and to perhaps admit to themselves that this weight-centric approach is doing a lot of harm. It's something that leads to people not going to doctor's appointments, for example, when they really need to, because they're afraid of being discriminated against on the basis of their weight. Dieting is associated with an increased risk of eating disorders, binging, weight cycling, also known as yo-yo dieting, which in itself is associated with or linked to physical harm, increased risk of diabetes, cardiovascular risk, not to mention all those physical side effects that we don't really talk about with one another. And I think when you're deep in diet culture, which I think many health professionals are, just by virtue of our training, it's very hard until you step out of that to see that potential harm that you're doing.
Absolutely. And it's hard to, when you work, sort of when you look into your behavior in any kind of regards to discrimination, and then you realize, oh, okay, I've sort of been following this mindset and it's been hurting people. It's painful, but it's sort of important to not make it about, how you feel, but sort of what you can do to impact people. So, I always find it really impressive when people, take a different route and think like this is actually something that I find ethically sort of aligns with what I want to do in life. And you also mentioned that you're working with parents. What made you decide to work with this sort of group in particular?
Yeah, so a few reasons. Firstly, it seemed like a natural fit for me, having worked with kids and parents in Australia, in the UK, then teaching about kids' nutrition at the university. But more than that, I know that many parents struggle with knowing how to feed their kids. Many parents question whether their kids are actually eating enough. They worry about what to do about sweets and sugar. They are doing the best that they can with the information that they have, for example, from their friends, from their family, probably their parents, from things that they read or hear on social media, things they hear through well intentioned public health campaigns, and so on. And at the same time, many of those things are unhelpful, contradictory, even counterproductive. And so, this is one thing that really, I think, doesn't get enough space in our healthcare settings, and we need to focus more on this, because a lot of these things are driving unhealthy food and body behaviors in our kids as they get older. We also know that, for example, that body image plays a huge role in kids' lives. It can affect the way that they turn up in the world. We know, for example, that girls, if they're worried about their appearance, they're less likely to put their hand up in class. Kids are less likely to want to go and play sport if they're concerned about their appearance. Food and body worries can lead or are associated with a higher risk of eating disorders. We know in Europe, for example, up to 50% of, I think it's 15-year-old girls report body dissatisfaction. In Switzerland, a 2012 study found 13 to 17-year-old girls reported body dissatisfaction and dieting at least once. Globally, 1 in 5 kids are affected by disordered eating. 6 to 8% of teens experience an eating disorder at any time. So we know this is really the scope of the issue. I know a lot of people think these are rare things. They might even think, for example, that body dissatisfaction has something to do with vanity, but we're really talking about how these things affect the way that kids turn up in the world.
Oh, thank you for sharing those stats. I feel like sometimes numbers make it really kind of how important it is to, work with the next generation, and then work with, like, as you do with the people that raise the next generation. But I think it also speaks to how normalized certain behaviors are, right? That no body, we all feel, uncomfortable about our body. It's normal, but it really shouldn't be. And if you look at a kid sort of that is shielded from that, it's not inherently human, right? It's just something that is taught or that we're raised with the culture. But kids, like a child, it doesn't worry. A child wants to play. It's sort of carefree in that way. But it's sort of, the certain behaviors are just so normalized. Do you find that as well?
Absolutely. And I fully agree, Doris. When we're born, we're not worried about our body. When we're a toddler, before we get exposed to the so-called body ideal, we're not concerned about our body. We're just playing freely. We're eating what we want and how much we want. And so it's very much something that we learn in our culture. We also see that in other studies where there is that have studied other populations where there's no body ideal. So the risk of developing food and body issues is much lower in those communities. And yes, those behaviours have been very much normalised by our society. We see that very much on social media. Particularly at the moment, we're seeing a return to a culture that promotes being as thin as possible, unfortunately, on TikTok, and so our kids are being exposed to that.
Yeah, and I think they don't. So that's why social media can be so harmful, right? In particular, because it's consumed by many. In particular, you mentioned TikTok. I think for the demographic of the teenagers and the sort of children in general, it's sort of their platform mostly, right? And you don't really question what you see there. And I think the format of what I eat in a day, I think seems really unharmful, right? It's just someone sharing their day. But what people don't understand is what it does also subconsciously, right? So you see portions, and then they often is framed by whatever weight loss or to have a slow tummy and whatever, which we all know isn't factually incorrect. But you don't have, as a teenager, when you're quite more on the emotional part, right? You don't really question or think, well, this person is not trained in that field. What you see is someone maybe that you aspire to be or that you want to look like, and then it might end up that you then follow that to what I eat in a day in terms of your eating schedule, right?
Absolutely. And it really, these kind of what I eat in a day messages are suggesting to young people that if they eat like this person, they can have a body like that like the person they're following. And we know as professionals that isn't the case. They're also in most cases promoting what is, for all intents and purposes, disordered eating.
Yeah, and I think you also, when it comes to social media, you don't really, your critical thinking is like, I mean, we have it, right? Even when we use social media, we're like, okay, this is only this is a small part of the world. I know that when I look outside my window, I see a whole different sort of kind of people. And I don't know how it is in Switzerland, but sort of the average woman in Germany wears the clothing size 42, 44. And that's not the people that I see on TikTok a lot of the times. But I think then subconsciously you see this body, a certain body image. And as you said, we're kind of shifting, right? Maybe we had a bit of the quote unquote body positivity. We had the era. So we're going back to more sort of the 90s fad diet kind of vibe with Ozempic and everything. But it's not, when I see this, my brain sort of registers that this is the norm. This is what a body looks like. This is what a body in workout clothes looks like. This is what a body eating so-and-so looks like, right? And this then sort of programs you to think, well, this is the norm because that's what I see all the time. But you're just seeing this tiny little fraction of what people also want you to see, right? And also like a very small fraction of the world's population.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so especially dangerous for kids, teens, young people, because they do fall into that trap of believing that this is what a so-called normal body looks like when they're consistently exposed to these kinds of messages. And as we know, the algorithms on these social media platforms, when you follow someone who's promoting this message, it'll keep sending you or suggesting you follow more and more people who promote the same kind of messages.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Is social media something that you work with your clients on, like when it comes to the parents?
Absolutely. So, and if it's a teen, of course, we'll also discuss social media. I might in in one of the earlier appointments, we might look at the teens' social media feed and talk about how they can adapt how they can unfollow that person that's promoting that information, or how they can show that they're not interested in that content anymore, and how they can diversify their feed, for example, by following people who are in the body positive movement, who are promoting body diversity and encouraging a much broader range of content, and really minimising or avoiding the dangerous content.
Oh, that's yeah, I always find social media, I always come back to it to being a tool that can be beneficial, but also it can have its consequences. If you'd like to share, what are some other things that you work with clients on, if there is some sort of more broader topics like social media, but maybe others that come to mind?
Yeah. So often so I have quite a range of different clients. If I'm working with parents, some of the things that I'll work on will talk about how to help their kids grow up with a more positive relationship with food, for example, and we'll also touch on how to help them grow up with body confidence. In other words, how to maintain that body confidence that they were born with, really, essentially, and also the eating skills, the intuitive eating skills that they were born with. So, with regards to bodies, if parents have come to me and they're wanting to raise kids who are body confident, one of the things we'll talk about is looking at making their home a body kind home, not talking negatively about one another's bodies, not parents not talking negatively about their own bodies, not talking negatively about other people's bodies, not talking negatively about kids' bodies, but rather focusing on what bodies can do for us, and moving away from an appearance-based focus. So that's certainly one thing that I discuss with parents. Another thing that we talk about is offering unconditional love and support for a child's body. And this can be really hard, especially for parents who have kids who are in a larger body. So I can really empathize with that. Can sometimes be quite challenging given the messages that we hear from our society, but also from in health campaigns, public health campaigns around raising kids to be within a certain body weight range. So there's enormous pressure on parents to do that, and so this can be something that is really quite challenging for parents. And then, with regards to separating worth from body size and body appearance, working on complementing kids' intrinsic qualities and skills, not their outward appearance. So that looks like trying to help their kids grow up knowing that their worth is not dependent on their appearance or their body size, like praising them, complimenting them for how kind and thoughtful they are, or how helpful they are, or how good at art or music, or whatever it happens to be, focusing on those things rather than appearance. We want to break this. We want kids to grow up knowing that their worth isn't related to their appearance. When it comes to food, I think one of the most important things that parents can do is learn about the division of responsibility, which is a concept or an approach developed by the Ellen Satter Institute, and I know that you're aware of it, Doris. It's extremely helpful offers a way of providing a flexible and reliable feeding routine, which kids really need. They need to know when their next meal and snack is coming. We talk about things like not trying to pressure kids to eat their vegetables, because that can affect their relationship with those foods. That's certainly one thing. We talk about food neutrality, talking about food in neutral terms. We hear often people say, "Oh, I'm so bad for eating ice cream," for example, or "Ice cream's so bad for me." In our society, it's really, really common to link food with morality, and we really need to move away from that. Uh, we talk about foods being good and bad. And the problem with this for kids is they think really literally. So when they hear someone like mom or dad say, "I'm really bad for eating, I was bad, I had some ice cream," when they then go to eat ice cream, they start to feel bad and start to feel guilty about eating the ice cream. And so that can affect their relationship with the ice cream or whatever food it happens to be. So we talk we talk a lot about using neutral language, calling a food what it is. So ice cream would be ice cream, biscuits would be biscuits, crisps would be crisps, not bad, not junk, not unhealthy. And by the same token, we talk about broccoli being broccoli and not a quote unquote superfood. And so that is something that I think people can start with really almost immediately. Sure, it's hard to get out of that habit when you're used to doing it, but it is something that you can start practicing almost immediately. And then a third thing in terms of the food is not making any foods off limits. There's, of course, one thing I need to add here, and that is that if a child has a medical reason why they need to avoid a certain food, like food allergy, of course, they'll need to avoid that food or those foods. But for a child that doesn't have a medical concern of that respect, it's really important that they learn that they have opportunities to self-regulate their intake of certain foods like sweets, for example, that they learn to eat what they need. That word self-regulate, I think it sounds a bit diety, but we're really talking about an amount that feels right for that child, and it might actually be an amount that as adults we might not, it might be more than what we feel comfortable with. And I think that speaks to the importance of healing our own relationship with food and body when that happens. So those are just some of the things that I talk about with parents.
Wow, thank you. That's so many important parts that I'm sure many people can already implement, even whether you have a child or not, right? I mean, they have benefits to all of us. And I think just also understanding that food isn't that powerful. Like, food can't make you morally bad. I think it's just, but we put food on this pedestal of, going to change my life and whatnot. And it's really not that powerful when you think about it, but it's that kind of culture that we grew up in, right? And so when you were sharing all the kind of topics that you discuss with your clients, the thing that kind of jumped out at me was that probably a lot of parents have to rethink their own relationship with food, right? And kind of the concept of relationship, both parent and child, but also parent to food and therefore child to food, right? And then also the role model, because I imagine it only goes as far as I can maybe pretend that this is what I do, but I mean, children, they pick up on things when they're not really authentic. So you also work a lot with the parents sort of on their own relationship with food.
Absolutely, and that forms often, when the parents are open to it, forms a big, big part of the work, because that working on our own relationship with food and body really leads to, or it informs the way that we approach feeding kids, the way that we approach talking about bodies with kids. So, yes, this is one of the most important things that parents and really anyone else who is an important figure in kids' lives, like grandparents, like teachers, daycare workers, sport coaches, this is one way that they can really help kids in the next generation grow up to have more food, to have more confidence about their body and about their food choices. So yes, absolutely something that I do discuss with parents, and that's something that we could probably talk about in a whole podcast in itself.
Amazing. Is there one or something that you tell parents that are worried about, the classic? I'm sure it's something they bring up a lot when I talk about parents, is that, oh, my kid only eats pasta without anything, no sauce. My kid doesn't eat vegetables. What do you have kind of one approach that, if I was a parent, what you'd maybe say to me in that situation?
Yeah. So I guess one of the first things I would do is look at how a parent's child is growing to make sure that they're growing in the way that we would expect them to grow. So that would look like looking at their growth trajectory from birth, which growth curve they're following, and we would expect that their weight and height would follow roughly, continue to follow those growth trajectories, and that I wouldn't see like a fall off of weight or the child not growing in height. So that would be one of the first things I would check. And that is something that I think can be very reassuring for parents when they see, oh, my child is still growing okay. So I think that's really enormously reassuring for a lot of parents. Secondly, it's really normal, particularly in the toddler age, for kids to refuse foods like vegetables. We know that kids have their sense of taste is so much stronger than ours as adults. And sometimes these foods just don't taste good to them. It also depends on how we cook them too, other things. But I think that knowing that this can be, I want to emphasize the can be a stage that a lot of kids actually go through where they reject the vegetables, and just reassuring parents to keep on offering those foods that they may have rejected. So far, we know that often it takes many, many, many times before a kid will accept a food. They need to learn about food. They need to see a food. They need to touch a food. They need to smell a food. They need to go through all these kind of processes before they actually end up putting the food in their mouths. I would also probably look with them to see about how many foods they are actually eating. And one of the reasons I would do that is because we know about ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. So I would be like looking for other signs that a child might be potentially affected by that. So those are some of the things that I would look at
Yeah.
with parents.
Amazing. I think reassuring parents they just want the best, right? And they're just so worried. And as you said in the beginning, right, everything they hear in social media, it's just fear mongering a lot, right? And it's just essentially not helpful. And I think to have that reassurance, and then also, as you said, to check what other vegetables they eat, because in my experience, kids prefer more fresh vegetables and maybe the crunchy things. And maybe you have a child that really likes, like when I think of one of my nieces, she really likes sort of lettuce and that kind of these crunchy things, but it's not really big on, cooked veggies. But that's, you still have foods that you can choose from, and, find veggies that she likes. And that's kind of, and like you said, offer them, but, have this kind of as a backup as well. And I don't know whether you speak or whether lunch boxes or just packed lunches or packed meals for school come up. But I always find when talking to parents, or when I work also with teachers a lot, when you look at the lunch boxes, I think sometimes people try and strategize to give the kids something healthy to eat, but knowing that they probably like it's nothing they like, but sort of almost cornering them with the food. I find it, and it's just not a really helpful approach in my opinion, because it's, to me, it's important a child eats, and then what it is kind of almost secondary to that, right? So if there is whatever a slice of bread with eggs on it, like that's fine, but it doesn't need to be packed with veggies and fruit if my child's not going to eat it, because it's just going to, come back home, and eventually maybe the child has enough money to buy something from the cafeteria. So it's just like, I feel like this is just not a great approach. I don't know whether that comes up for your work as well.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the age of the child, of course, whether they're going to daycare or whether they're at school, in primary school or at high school. So it really, really depends. In Switzerland, a lot of kids or some kids might go home for lunch, or they might go to someone's place where like a cooked lunch is offered. There are parents, of course, who send snacks, for example, with their child to daycare or primary school, and we have there is a policy in Switzerland, unfortunately, of where certain foods are not recommended to be part of that in their snack or lunch box. And I agree with you. I don't find this approach very helpful. As I mentioned earlier in our when we were talking, it's really important to offer an all foods fit approach, and that includes offering foods that are, let's say, demonized in our society alongside other foods like a sandwich and an apple. Alongside that, you might offer some crisps or another food. And this is part of this food neutrality approach as well, is really just bringing those foods off the pedestal and really making foods just food. All foods fit. All foods are okay. All foods offer us something. And also, I think that idea behind, or that I spoke to before, kids with ARFID, for example, what are they going to do when they come to school and they're only allowed to bring certain foods? They might not be the foods that they can actually eat. And at the end of the day, the bottom line in nutrition, of course, is getting enough food to eat.
Absolutely. And I always think when it comes to these packed lunches or packed snacks or whatever, I always encourage the parent at the end of the day, try and eat it, because some foods, when they sit or they're in a box for 2 hours, like for example, my niece once wanted these apple crisps, but once they're out, they no longer crispy, right? So, and then just to try, how does that bread, after 2 hours of sitting in whatever topping, like you try and see, because kids are more, I find that they're more kind of prone to textures and that kind of stuff. They're more sensitive to that than maybe adults, because I feel like many adults we can be more rational with food. We're like, well, I have this lunch and I'm going to eat it, I'm not enjoying it. But the kids, in particular the younger kids, are more thinking, I don't want to eat that, so I'm just not going to eat that.
Yeah, right. It's so off-putting for kids because their sense of taste and smell is so much more heightened than ours. I distinctly remember being in primary school myself, and those were the days where you just left your sandwich, your egg sandwich, or your your peanut butter sandwich in your lunchbox. And yeah, absolutely. By the time lunch came around, the sandwich wasn't like looking, tasting very good. So yeah,
Absolutely. Put yourself in your kids' shoes, and that can be
absolutely.
can be beneficial. One final question that I have for you, Louise, is we spoke about body confidence and body acceptance as well. Like, how do you practice? I mean, this podcast is all about body acceptance, so that's why I'm asking. How do you currently practice body acceptance and self-care?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Doris. And one of the things that I try to do on a daily basis is, and one of the things that I found most helpful for me is practicing body gratitude. So most days I'll think of something something that I feel grateful for my body for doing. I think we're so used to our bodies just going and going and going. And I think it's helpful to take a moment and actually realize everything that our bodies do for us every minute of every hour of every day of every year. They're here for us 24/7. And so I like to be thankful for my body for the things that it does for me. So that is certainly something that I do think about a lot, and probably on a daily basis. Another thing that I do that I find is really helpful is to wear clothing that doesn't feel like it constricts my body, that feels comfortable, that allows me to move. Makes an enormous difference. I find my clients find it makes a huge difference too. And thirdly, I find some kind of movement really helps me feel energized and feel connected with my body. And for me, that looks like maybe hiking. I'm blessed in 5 minutes. I can get out into the forest and at the moment hear the birds singing and get some fresh air and really connect with my body. Another thing I love to do is swimming, particularly if it's in a natural body of water like the ocean or a mountain lake or a river. So, and if I don't have access to those, like at the moment it might be a swimming pool, I love the feeling of water or being suspended in water. I've always loved that. Probably not a surprise considering the country I come from, where we're surrounded by an ocean. But those are the things that I do invest some time in.
Oh, thank you. I always find it very interesting. And yeah, just comfortable clothing is such a game changer, right? I feel like the pandemic changed a lot for us, that we rethought, in particular, trousers and jeans, right? Like, who needs those? It just needs to be
Exactly.
comfortable.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Louise. I found it super inspiring and such an important topic, how to raise kids with food and body confidence. So thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Thank you so much for having me, Doris. It's been a pleasure being on, and look forward to keeping in touch.
So thank you so much for staying till the end. I hope you found this episode as informative as I did. All the information on Louise you'll find in the show notes. She also provided a list on resources in terms of books if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper. Make sure to follow her on Instagram as well. And if you have any feedback for me, for us, please feel free to share that. You can comment, or you can send both me and Louise a message on Instagram. Or maybe you have any wishes for future guests or future topics, then also feel free to let me know. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you tune in soon. Take care.